When we speak of prayer, most of us think immediately of words, long strings of sentences, carefully woven or hastily whispered, depending on the urgency of our need. But words alone, however finely arranged, do not make a prayer effective. A man can talk endlessly into the air and remain unheard, while another, with only a few broken syllables, can touch the heart of heaven. What then makes the difference? It is not the vocabulary, nor the length, nor the outward beauty of the prayer. It is the condition of the one who prays. Consider a child speaking to his father. If the child merely recites a poem taught by someone else, his father may smile at the cleverness, but he will not mistake it for genuine conversation. But if that same child stammers out a request in faltering words, the father leans in with all attention, because what matters is not the eloquence, but the reality of the relationship. So it is with God. Prayer is not a performance but a communion, not a lecture to heaven but a lifting of the heart toward its Maker. One of the first things that makes prayer effective is sincerity. If you are merely repeating words because they sound holy, you have not yet prayed. The essence of prayer is truthfulness of soul. To pray effectively is to lay aside the masks we wear before others and even before ourselves, and to come as we truly are. There is no use in pretending to be strong when we are weak, nor pretending to be wise when we are lost. God listens to the honest cry, not the carefully polished speech. The greatest barrier to prayer is not our weakness, but our insistence on hiding it. Another measure of effective prayer is attention. How often do our minds wander while our lips are busy? We may kneel in body, but our thoughts race through the day's plans, worries, and ambitions. Prayer that is distracted is like trying to carry water in a sieve that leaks away before it reaches its destination. To pray effectively, we must give our whole attention, however small it feels, to the presence of God. Even if our prayer lasts only a minute, let it be a minute of undivided focus, rather than an hour of divided thought. Faith also makes prayer effective, but faith is not some vague optimism or blind hope. It is trust in the character of the one to whom we pray. Many people measure faith by how certain they are that they will get what they asked for. But true faith is not certainty in outcomes. It is certainty in God's wisdom. An effective prayer does not demand that God rearrange the world according to our design. Rather, it entrusts desires into His hands, believing that His design is better, even when it contradicts ours. The child who trusts his father does not insist on choosing every meal. He knows that what is placed before him will nourish him, whether it is sweet or bitter. Gratitude, too, strengthens prayer. When we approach God only with lists of demands, prayer becomes little more than a shopping order sent to heaven. But when we season our prayers with thanksgiving, we discover that much of what we asked for has already been given. Gratitude shifts the heart from scarcity to abundance, and an abundant heart is more receptive to divine grace. A grateful soul prays not only for what it lacks, but rejoices in what it already holds. And then there is persistence. We live in an age that expects quick results, instant responses, and immediate gratification. Yet prayer does not operate on such terms. Often the most effective prayers are not answered swiftly, but through long patience. Persistence in prayer is not about nagging God, as though He were reluctant to bless us, but about shaping our own hearts into deeper dependence. Sometimes the delay is not punishment, but preparation, for the soul must grow strong enough to carry the weight of the answer. Finally, humility is the crown of effective prayer. To come before God as if He were an equal partner in negotiation is to misunderstand Him entirely. Prayer is not the art of persuading heaven, but the posture of yielding earth. Humility in prayer is not groveling, but recognizing the reality of who we are in relation to who He is. The proud heart may pray eloquently, but the humble heart prays effectively, for it knows that every good thing flows from God alone. When all of these come together, sincerity, attention, faith, gratitude, persistence, humility, prayer ceases to be an empty ritual and becomes a living connection. It becomes less about changing God's will and more about being changed ourselves, so that we may see His will as good. Prayer, then, is not so much a tool for obtaining what we want as it is a path for becoming who we were meant to be. Pray with sincerity and undivided attention, not polished words or empty rituals. To pray with sincerity and undivided attention is to enter into the very heart of what prayer was meant to be. So often, the temptation is to believe that effectiveness in prayer is found in eloquence, in long and flowing phrases that sound beautiful when spoken aloud. But the truth is that prayer was never designed to be a performance. The one who listens does not need our rehearsed lines, nor is he impressed with ornate speech. He desires honesty, not artifice, the unpolished truth of our souls, rather than the carefully curated image we might present before others. Sincerity in prayer begins when we strip away pretense, when we let go of the masks we wear before the world and dare to stand before God exactly as we are. A soul that comes in weakness, in brokenness, in simple truthfulness, will always be heard more clearly than one that hides behind eloquence. Sincerity is not only about honesty of words, but honesty of condition. If your heart is burdened, to say you are at peace is to lie, and lies never reach heaven. If you are struggling with doubt, confessing it is more powerful than pretending certainty. Prayer is not about telling God what we think He wants to hear, but exposing the reality of who we are. He already knows, yet there is something transformative in our willingness to speak it. The act of voicing our truth breaks down the walls of pride and self-deception that so often silence the heart. In that sense, sincerity becomes not only the doorway to effective prayer, but also the medicine for the soul itself. Yet, sincerity alone is not enough if it is scattered, distracted, or half-hearted. Attention is the other side of the coin, for how many times do we kneel and find our lips moving while our thoughts chase the noise of the world? The body is present, but the mind has wandered into tomorrow's worries or yesterday's regrets. Such prayers are like arrows shot into the air without aim. They drift without direction and fall short of their mark. To pray with undivided attention is to silence, even if only for a moment, the restless chatter of the mind and to focus wholly on the one we address. It is not easy, for distraction lurks in every corner of human thought, but the very effort to recollect ourselves, to draw back wandering thoughts, becomes an offering in itself. Each time the mind drifts, and each time we pull it back, we show God that we desire Him above the 1,000 clamoring voices that demand our focus. Undivided attention also reshapes how we think of prayer's length. Many believe that long prayers are better prayers, as though time itself measures sincerity. But what is an hour of distraction compared to a minute of absolute focus? The quality of prayer is not found in its duration, but in its depth. A single, heartfelt sentence, spoken with full attention, can accomplish more than a torrent of words that never once truly lifted the heart upward. Imagine a conversation with a loved one. If we spoke for hours but never truly listened, never truly engaged, the words would mean little. But if we looked into their eyes and spoke a few words with all sincerity, the bond would deepen. So it is with prayer. To pray effectively, then, is to guard our sincerity from pretense and our attention from distraction. These two together shape the soul into something transparent before God, Think of a window. If it is covered with paint, however colorful, light cannot pass through. If it is cracked with distraction, the image beyond it becomes distorted. But if the window is clear and whole, then light shines in. In the same way, sincerity removes the paint of pretense, and attention heals the cracks of distraction, allowing the presence of God to shine into the depths of the soul. Achieving such prayer is not always easy. The modern world thrives on noise, hurry, and constant stimulation, and to still the heart enough to be sincere and attentive feels like swimming against the current. Yet, the struggle itself is part of the effectiveness. Just as muscles grow stronger through resistance, so does the soul grow stronger by the effort to focus. Even if we fail 100 times in a single prayer, each return of the heart to God is another step into deeper communion. The effectiveness is not in perfection, but in perseverance. One might also wonder if sincerity and attention mean we must always feel deeply every time we pray, but that is not the case. Feelings rise and fall, but sincerity is not measured by emotion. It is measured by truth. To pray sincerely is to speak honestly even when the words feel dry, and to give attention even when the heart feels dull. The very act of showing up truthfully without disguise is already a victory. For in that moment we are offering God the reality of ourselves, which is the only gift He desires and the only one we are truly able to give. Praying with sincerity and undivided attention transforms prayer from a ritual into a living conversation. It clears away the clutter, strips the heart bare, and allows us to encounter God not as an idea or a duty, but as a reality. The soul that prays this way discovers that effectiveness is not about getting what we ask for, but about being shaped by the one we are addressing. In such prayer, the walls of pretense crumble, the noise of distraction quiets, and what remains is a genuine communion between creature and creator, the kind of communion that strengthens faith, deepens peace, and brings the soul into alignment with the eternal will of God. Anchor your prayer in faith and humility, trusting God's wisdom above your own desires. To anchor prayer in faith and humility is to acknowledge that true effectiveness does not come from demanding outcomes, but from trusting the one who governs outcomes. Many approach prayer as if it were a transaction, a way of persuading heaven to bend toward their will. But prayer is not bargaining with God. It is a surrender of the heart into the hands of the one who knows more than we could ever comprehend. Faith in prayer is not blind optimism or a hopeful gamble. It is a deliberate trust in the character of God, a confidence that He is wise, good, and attentive, even when His answers do not match our desires. To pray with faith is to place our petitions before Him with open hands, believing that He hears, that He cares, and that His ways, however mysterious, are better than our own. Faith is not measured by how strongly we insist that God will give us exactly what we ask. Rather, it is measured by how deeply we trust Him even when He does not. The child who trusts his father does not need to dictate every detail of the day. He simply knows that his father will guide him toward what is good, even if that goodness does not always look like pleasure. In the same way, faith in prayer is not about securing our preferred outcome, but about resting in the assurance that the outcome God chooses will be right. This trust allows us to release the tight grip we often keep over our lives, a grip that turns prayer into nothing more than wishful control. Humility, hand in hand with faith, is what guards us from turning prayer into arrogance. Without humility, prayer can become a stage on which we recite our self-importance, either to impress others or to convince ourselves. Humility strips away the illusion that we are equals negotiating with God It reminds us of who we are in relation to Him, creatures before the Creator, dependent beings before the Sustainer of all life. To come to prayer humbly is not to grovel or to diminish ourselves into nothingness, but to stand in proper perspective, acknowledging our limitations and His boundless wisdom. It is this posture of humility that makes prayer effective, because it prepares us to receive rather than demand, to yield rather than dictate. When faith and humility unite, prayer takes on a different character. Instead of being consumed with anxieties about whether God will answer in the way we expect, we begin to see prayer as a way of aligning ourselves with His will. The focus shifts from manipulating circumstances to transforming the heart. We pray not only for our situations to change, but for ourselves to change within them. This shift is the essence of effectiveness, for a prayer that changes the soul draws us closer to God than a prayer that merely rearranges external conditions. Faith also redefines what unanswered prayer means. Many lose heart when they do not receive the response they longed for, assuming silence means indifference. But faith teaches us that silence can itself be an answer, one that requires deeper trust. Sometimes the delay is protection, sometimes the refusal is mercy, sometimes the silence is a call to greater endurance. Faith does not crumble under these mysteries, but accepts them as part of a larger tapestry woven by divine wisdom. And humility keeps us from demanding explanations, teaching us instead to bow before the incomprehensible, knowing that the Maker of the stars does not owe us an account, but does grant us His presence. Anchoring prayer in faith and humility also protects us from the pride of using prayer as a tool to elevate ourselves above others. There is a temptation to measure spirituality by how often or how eloquently one prays, but true prayer is not a performance. The one who prays with faith and humility does not pray to be seen by others, but to be heard by God. And in secret places, away from applause, their prayer grows stronger because it is anchored not in human approval, but in divine attention. Such hidden prayers are often the most powerful, for they are stripped of all self-serving motives. To cultivate faith in prayer is to train the soul to look beyond the visible. Life is filled with contradictions, with suffering, with unanswered questions, and without faith, prayer risks becoming fragile and shallow, breaking apart under disappointment. But with faith, even when the storms rage, the soul can remain steady, anchored not in outcomes but in the unchanging goodness of God. This kind of faith transforms prayer from a desperate plea into a confident trust. It does not mean we stop asking or stop longing, but that our asking is accompanied by peace, and our longing is tempered by trust. Humility deepens this peace by reminding us that we are not the center of the universe. Prayer that lacks humility becomes self-centered, revolving around our desires, our plans, our timing, but humility expands the horizon. It lifts our eyes from ourselves to the vastness of God's purposes. It helps us see that our individual lives are part of a larger story, and that story is written by hands far wiser than ours. This recognition does not diminish the importance of our prayers, but enriches them, for we begin to see our petitions not as isolated cries, but as threads woven into the greater fabric of God's will for the world. Anchoring prayer in faith and humility, then, is not about reducing our passion in asking, but about purifying our posture in asking. It allows us to come with boldness, yet without arrogance, with confidence, yet without presumption. It is the paradox of standing before the throne of heaven as beloved children who dare to ask while also bowing low as creatures who know their place. In that balance lies the secret of effectiveness, for it opens us to receive not only what we desire but what we truly need, which is often beyond our understanding. Strengthen your prayer with gratitude and persistence, allowing it to transform your heart as much as your circumstances. To strengthen prayer with gratitude and persistence is to give it both roots and wings. For gratitude roots the soul in what has already been given, while persistence lifts it beyond the fleeting nature of moods and circumstances. Too often, prayer becomes nothing more than a list of demands, a series of requests handed up to heaven with little acknowledgement of what has already been granted. Such prayers lack depth because they reduce the relationship with God to a cycle of asking and receiving. Gratitude changes this dynamic entirely. When we begin prayer with thanksgiving, when we pause to recognize the countless gifts that already surround us, we reframe the act of prayer itself. Suddenly, it is no longer driven only by lack, but also by abundance. Gratitude clears the eyes to see that blessings are not occasional interruptions in life, but the very fabric of it, woven daily in small mercies and unseen protections. In this way, prayer becomes richer, more vibrant, more effective, because it arises from a heart that is already full rather than one that is endlessly empty. Gratitude also changes the way we perceive God's responses. A person without gratitude will measure every prayer by whether they received precisely what they wanted, and so disappointment will come quickly. But a grateful person sees that answers often come in unexpected forms. Gratitude makes us attentive, helping us to recognize that the provision of God may not always match the shape of our request, but may nonetheless meet the deeper need behind it. To thank God is to admit that His wisdom is at work, even when His methods escape our understanding. The more we practice thanksgiving, the more we discover that prayer is not primarily about securing new blessings, but about awakening to the blessings that already surround us. Gratitude, then, makes prayer effective not because it manipulates outcomes, but because it transforms perception, teaching us to see with clearer eyes and a more receptive spirit. Yet gratitude alone is not enough, for prayer also requires persistence. Persistence in prayer does not mean endless repetition of the same words as though God were reluctant and had to be persuaded. It means returning again and again to the posture of dependence, refusing to let the hardships of delay or the discouragement of silence drive us into despair. Persistence acknowledges that prayer is not a magic formula, but a relationship, and relationships are sustained not by one conversation, but by continual communication. When we persist in prayer, we demonstrate that we are not merely interested in momentary relief, but in ongoing communion. We show that we are willing to trust through the waiting, to remain faithful even when there is no immediate sign of change. Persistence shapes the soul in ways that quick answers never could. A swift response may satisfy the request, but does little to strengthen the character of the one who asks. A delayed response, however, trains patience, deepens trust, and builds endurance. In persistence, prayer becomes less about the object we seek and more about the transformation that happens in the seeking. It teaches us to cling to God, not only for what He can give, but for who He is. The very act of returning again and again, even when discouraged, is itself a form of worship, for it proclaims that God is worthy of our trust, even when the evidence is scarce. Gratitude and persistence also work together in harmony. Gratitude keeps persistence from becoming bitter, while persistence keeps gratitude from becoming complacent. Without gratitude, persistent prayer might sour into resentment, as if we were constantly knocking on a door that will not open. But when we weave thanksgiving into our persistence, each return to prayer is infused with remembrance of God's past faithfulness. We do not come only with demands, but also with reminders of what He has already done. Conversely, without persistence, gratitude could become shallow, a simple acknowledgement of blessings without the deeper endurance of faith. Gratitude says, "I see what you have done," while persistence says, "I will continue to trust even when I do not yet see what you will do." Together, they create a prayer life that is both steady and alive, anchored in the past and pressing toward the future. To pray with gratitude and persistence is also to resist the temptation of discouragement. Life will inevitably bring seasons of silence, times when heaven feels far, and answers seem delayed beyond endurance. In those moments, gratitude calls us to remember, to look back on all the times God has already proven himself faithful. Memory becomes fuel for hope, and thanksgiving becomes a shield against despair. Persistence then pushes us forward, urging us not to give up simply because the way is long. In this rhythm of remembering and pressing on, the soul finds strength to continue. Another dimension of persistence is honesty. To be persistent in prayer is not to pretend that waiting is easy, but to keep bringing even the frustration of waiting to God. Persistence does not demand that we come always cheerful or strong. It allows us to return even with tears, with doubts, with weariness. The persistence is not in the feeling but in the act, in choosing to keep praying when the heart feels heavy. That choice itself speaks louder than words, for it shows that beneath the struggle lies a deeper trust that God is still worth approaching. Gratitude, likewise, is not merely about listing obvious blessings, but about cultivating a vision to see the hidden ones. It is easy to thank God for provision when it arrives in abundance, but gratitude also thanks Him for protection when dangers were unseen, for lessons hidden within trials, for the strength given in weakness. Such gratitude requires a deeper sight, one that looks not only at what pleases us, but at what shapes us. The more we practice this kind of gratitude, the more our prayers shift from narrow requests to wide recognition of God's presence in all things. When gratitude fills the heart and persistence steadies the will, prayer becomes more than a momentary activity. It becomes a way of living. Every circumstance becomes an opportunity for thanksgiving, and every delay becomes an invitation to trust more deeply. Prayer ceases to be a transaction and becomes a journey, one in which the soul is constantly shaped, purified and strengthened through both joy and struggle. This is the kind of prayer that endures, the kind that transforms, the kind that truly becomes effective not only in touching heaven, but in reshaping the one who prays.